So good afternoon. So my name is Orville Baldos, and I'm going to share with you the research that we've been doing at the H1 site on re-vegetation with native Hawaiian plants based on our experience. So just to give you a brief history of the project, our research at H1 is actually funded by the Hawaii Department of Transportation. So we got 3 grants from HDOT for the past 8 years. The first grant was in 2006 to 2012, and we were tasked to develop hydromulch protocols for 2 grasses and 1 sedge. The first grass is Pili grass. Second would be aki or Sporobolus virginicus. And then the third one is a sedge species, is a coastal sedge called aki or Fimbristylis cymosa. So after 2012, we applied again for another grant with HDOT, and these 2 grants, these 2 latest grants, are actually grants that help try to develop establishment techniques for seed production. Because yes, we want more natives on the roadsides, but where are we going to get those plants? So we kind of thought maybe we can produce the seeds on the highways. So the first grant was all about establishing a seed production protocol for grasses. So this started in 2012 and 2015. So this includes seed production protocols for Pili grass. We also added Kakonakona here, or Panicum torridum, Cenchrus agrimonioides, or Kamanomano, this is an endangered grass, and Eragrostis variabilis, or Emoloa. And then the third and last grant that we currently have with HDOT is the shrub component. It started in 2013 and ended, supposed to end in 2017. We're looking at 6 shrub species. The first shrub species is Hina or Eragrostis splendens. The second is Mayapila or Caparison lichana. And then the third is Hinopodium Hawaiian or Aveo. Fourth is Dodonea viscosa or Alii. The fifth is Cymosa or Lima. And then the 6th is Walteria indica or Lualo. So these are actually the species that we studied for the 3 grants.
I was going to say, seeds for Lualo, go any construction site, they pop up everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. So these are the 6 species that we've been studying for the past 8 years. Actually, some of these we haven't really touched yet, especially for the shrubs. So those are ongoing. So the research areas that we've been doing at the H1 can be divided into 3 parts. The first would be to develop weed control techniques. Second is to look at planting and establishment protocols. And then the third would be plant materials production or plant materials development. For weed control techniques, we're looking at the feasibility of pre- and post-emergence herbicides in controlling weeds in plantings of native plants. So as you can see here, this is a picture of the H1 site, the slope area where we established Pili. And then we have broadleaf weeds that have come up, and we just sprayed it with a post-emergence herbicide. So for the past 8 years, we've looked at screening actually pre- and post-emergence herbicides for Pili grass, Aki, Kakonakona, and Emoloa and Buhaboa. So if you want more information on the pre- and post-emergence herbicides that we screened and we found out to be effective in controlling grassy or broadleaf weeds on these species, you can check out this URL below. This is actually the website URL of Dr. Joseph DeFrank's weed science lab. So,
what was the best combination?
It depends on the species that you're controlling. So for Aki, which is a sedge, we found that fusilade can be safely used on top to control grassy weeds. So that would be one example. Second one is looking at planting and establishment protocols. We're looking at two areas. One is hydromulching, and then the second one is establishment through transplant. So hydromulching is basically a way of establishing large-scale establishment of a ground cover or a grass, wherein you have a hydromulch machine which has a tank and attached to a pump, and in that tank you fill it up with water and paper mulch, and the pump actually mixes it. You can put the seed inside that pump and then spray that mixture onto your planting surface, or you can actually drop your seeds on your drip line and then cap it with a hydromulch cap. So the research that we did for these native plants, we found that hydroseeding, so hydroseeding meaning you can mix the seed inside the hydromulcher and spray it on the top of your planting surface. So Mau Aki, which is the sedge, Fimbristylis cymosa, is actually amendable. You can use it you can hydroseed it onto your planting surface. But the thing is, if you're establishing from seed, you need to be aware that you need to be on the lookout constantly in terms of maintaining your plots weed free. Because if you actually let some weeds into your plantings, then it will be really hard to control it. The other method is through hydromulch cap. So we tried actually hydroseeding Pili grass seeds, but our pump basically killed the seeds. So what we recommend is to lay out the seeds on the drip line and then spray it with the hydromulch cap. The spray is basically just to keep or tack the seed in place on top of the soil surface, so you have good seed-soil contact. We also found that this method is effective with aki stems. So you lay down the aki stems, which is soaked in rooting solution, on top of your drip line or your planting surface, and then you cover it with a layer of hydromulch. So we found that effective as well for large-scale establishment of aki. So the other method that we found useful is through the use of transplants. So basically all the species that we studied, or all the species, can be established through transplants. However, it's advisable to, like for ground covers such as grasses, it's better to establish from seed rather than transplants, because it's much more, I think it's much more cheaper to establish by seeds. But for shrubs, it's ideal because you only need a few shrubs, especially if you're, because your landscape could be, most of your landscape would be your ground cover, which is your grass component, and then you have a few shrubs. So it's better to establish the shrubs using transplants. So our system of establishing, or our system of making transplants is by germinating the seeds in seed trays and then transplanting them into nibble tubes like this. And then once they reach a certain size, we outplant them onto your site. So the third and last research area that we looked at is plant materials production. So we looked at the use of seeds for propagation, and for plants that don't produce viable seed, we use cuttings. So for seeds, we studied several aspects, particularly seed dormancy. So seed dormancy is a mechanism wherein if you plant the seed, it won't germinate. There are certain conditions that has to be met for the seed to germinate. So for the species that we studied for grasses, we found that Pili grass has a dormancy period. So if you harvest fresh pili grass seed and then you plant it directly, it won't germinate. So you have to, what you need is to store the pili grass seeds at 12% humidity at 86 degrees Fahrenheit for a year for it to lose its dormancy. So that's the long-term, if you want a long-term storage for pili grass. But the short-term treatment for germinating is to treat it with a smoke solution, because you can actually make your own smoke solution by burning pili grass and then bubbling it into your water solution, and then you soak your seeds in that water solution. So pili grass is a fire-adapted species, so that's why it responds to smoke. The other grass species that we found that has seed dormancy is the Kakonakona. It requires an after-ripening period, so you have to store it similar conditions as pili grass. We didn't find any smoke-stimulated, based on the research of Dr. Scott Lukas, he didn't find any stimulation with liquid smoke, particularly the commercial-grade liquid smoke. For the shrubs, the dormancy mechanism of most of the shrubs that we studied is basically you have a hard seed coat that prevents water to go into your seed. So we found that scarification and nicking. So scarification, we have a tumbler which is lined with sandpaper on top. So put the seeds inside there and then you topple it until for a certain amount of time until you get cracks in your seed. So we found that effective in Emoloa. Ilima, I haven't tried, actually I tried using the tumbler with Ilima, but it's very hard to scarify it with that method. The method that I found effective was just to nick the seeds one by one, but it's a little bit laborious, so I'm looking for a more large-scale method of treatment. Mayapilo also has a hard seed coat, so nicking is also a good way to break its dormancy. Research that has been published for aali indicate that boiling, actually pouring boiling water on your aali seeds can help scarify it. So after seed dormancy, the other thing that we looked at is the seed production or harvest timing. Based on observation, Emoloa and Ilima seem to be seasonal in terms of flowering. Emoloa only flowers during short days. So we've seen that it flowers from November to about March. So you only have one cropping season of your seed for Emoloa. And then for Ilima, I have plantings at the H1 that I observed earlier this year and found that the peak flowering is like December to March. And then after that, it's just vegetative. Like right now, since we've been having rains, it's all vegetative. So Ilima has a seasonal flowering habit as well. For other species like pili grass, abelio, pukaloa, and mauaki-aki, there seems to be no season in terms of flowering. So they continually produce flowers and set seed. For pili grass, though, you have to mow your plantings, and then after 3 months, you get your seed. So you have to constantly mow it to get seed production. Also for mauaki-aki, the same thing. Kakonakona is a very short day or short life plant, because it only lives for 3 months. So after 3 months, it produces seed. So Kakonakona can be used actually for if you're trying to revegetate, like quickly revegetate an exposed site. So that's the applications for Kakonakona. Oops. Okay. So next is the use of cuttings. So we found that apical and tip cuttings are useful or are effective for propagating aki-aki. Kamanomano, Ilima, and Aveo. For Ilima and Aveo, I just did a preliminary study, and it wasn't replicated, so I have to do further testing to see if it really works. Because I got, although it wasn't replicated, I still got some stems to root for apical cuttings. Aali can also be air layered, so if you want to reproduce a particular clone of aali, then you can air layer it. So that's the research. That's basically an overview of the research that we've been doing at the H1 site. So this is basically a satellite photo of where our site is. So the H1 University Avenue site is just EVA of the Stanshire Center. So if you come in from H1 or University Avenue, it's on the right side. So here's a close-up satellite photo of the site in 2004. So at this time, there was no studies yet. So this is what the original site looked like. So we zoom into one particular area of the site wherein I have a series of photos. So one important thing when you're establishing native plants is that you really need to be thorough in your site preparation, because site preparation is key, because if you don't do well on that, then you'll have weed problems in the future, and that might also affect your establishment. So this is the site in 2006 where we just got the grant, so we're just starting the site, where we dug a hole here because this was one of the irrigation sources that we could tap through. So the site was basically composed of just buffalo grass, a couple of invasive trees, the opauna, African tulip, and the octopus tree, so we had to cut that down to establish our plants. After we cut down those plants, we had to clean part of the site. Actually, there was a homeless man that I think used to live under that tree, so we just manually removed all the stuff there, like books and actually bottles of, I don't know if that's urine or something, but there's liquid inside of those bottles, so we had to do that manually. So after you clean the site, then you tap into your irrigation and then establish your irrigation. So this irrigation system that we have is basically just polypipe with attached to a sprinkler head. We wanted to establish irrigation because we want to kill the weeds. We want to stimulate germination of the weed seeds and then kill them so that you exhaust your weed seed bank, so you have minimal weed seeds to deal with when you establish your plant or when you start planting. So once after you irrigate, then the weeds are very happy. Then at their happiest, then you kill them. You kill them with herbicide. So you do it. So after they've been killed, you do it another time. Actually, you do it at least 3 times. So you flush and then kill, and then flush and then kill. And then after that, most of your weed seeds have germinated. So you have a bare planting surface to plant on. So the next series of photos are just satellite photos through the years of the site. So this is the site in 2004. 2008, actually we established our plantings in 2007. Our first plantings were of the Malaki-aki, the sedge. Then I did my hydroseeding studies on this side of the plot. And then we basically prepared this site for future plantings. 2009 was sort of the peak of that first grant that we had. So we expanded our Malaki-aki plots a bit, and then the hydroseeding study was finished, so we removed all that and then planted Pili grass on the corridor here. We also did some hydroseeding studies here But after that, we established bands of Pili grass here as a way to simulate a natural landscape. We also established an Emoloa patch over here for our seed source. Between 2009 and 2003, we had a lag in our funding, so there was actually 1 year 1 year without funding, so no maintenance at all, no irrigation. So this is what the field looked like during that period. So the green parts are your weeds. So weeds invaded the Mau Api-Api, the Emoloa, part of the Pili patch. And then in 2013, we got the second grant. So we started all over again. We did a site reset. And at this point in time, we rejuvenated the Pili patch over here, cleaned up the Emoloa patch, and then planted the next part of the grant, which is looking at shrubs. So let's look in detail into 3 sites. Let's look closer. So the first site is this area over here, which is the Mau Api-Api, and now it's a shrub site. Second one is the Emoloa site, and then the third one is the site over here with Pili grass, and now it's interplanted with shrub species. So at this first site, so our first planting started in 2007. This was the sedge, Api-Api sedge. So we had it on wheat cloth. This is about 4 months after planting, so they look very happy. 9 months after planting, we had our first seed harvest. So the reason why we planted the Mau Api-Api on wheat seed cloth is that we can just cut the seed heads with a landscape hedge and then suck it up with a leaf blower to get the seeds. And then in 2008, about 1.5 years after planting, we started having problems with Bermuda grass because there was a leak in the irrigation. So we tried killing it with fusilade because we did some studies to try to selectively kill grasses in this sedge species. So we found fusilade very effective. So we tried to control it slowly. Approximately 2 years after planting, we were still producing seeds from these plantings. And then we still have the Bermuda problem. So we still try to spray it with the post-emergence herbicide, but between 2010 and 2011, that's where we had our, the first grant was winding up, so the maintenance was also winding up. So by 2011, the Bermuda grass has escaped and just covered most of the plantings. And at this time, the irrigation was turned off, so the Mau Api-Api was still barely hanging on, but eventually it died. So in 2013, we reset the site. So we cleared everything, cleaned it up, flushed the area again, and then killed the weeds repeatedly. So this is another look at the site. And then in December of 2013, we started the shrub component. So we planted Emoloa in drip tubes. This served as our seed production area. So about 4 months after planting Emoloa, they look nice. Ilima at the back as well. And this is about a year ago. So the Emoloa has spread out. The Ilima has grown really tall. And then I found that there's variability in our Ilima seedlings. So we have like really tall ones as tall as me, or even taller than me, and then some like knee high or lower. So based on observations on this planting, we can see that Mau Api-Api is not persistent without irrigation, and it needs a little bit more management. So when you have this sort of planting, you need to consider that you need to consider irrigation for Mau Api-Api. And then you've seen the Bermuda grass struggle that we have, so it's very difficult to control. So once you really need to kill it before you start planting, because eventually if it regrows from one stolon, then it actually blows up into a big problem. So, and then Muhaloa, this is a very young planting, but we kind of observe a decline about 1.5 years after planting, and may need some pruning to rejuvenate the plant. So now let's move on to the next area, which is the Emoloa and Chenopodium plantings. So this area was planted in 2009, initially to Emoloa. So we have Emoloa plants in nibble tubes, so we had it covered again with plastic mulch and then on drip. About 3 months, this is how the area looked like. 10 months after planting, you have big plants and they're starting to flower. As I mentioned before, they start to flower about November. Then by January, most of the plants have flowered, and we were able to get seed harvest for this particular crop. In 2011, again, we had a Bermuda grass problem in this area. So you can see this patch over here. So Bermuda grass is slowly creeping into our planting. It's very difficult because there's no, well, in terms of our research, there's no herbicide that can selectively kill a grass on a grass. So at this point as well, the grant was winding down, so we just let it go. So it's all Bermuda grass after that. So no irrigation, no maintenance, Bermuda grass. So mid-2013, we cleaned up the site again because we got the second grant for the shrubs. Covered it with plastic mulch, and then started planting Chenopodium on erosion control socks. Because I guess the reason that we wanted to plant on the socks is that we don't want to make holes on the plastic that can be an entry point to Bermuda grass. So we tried, well, maybe we can plant it on the erosion control socks to see what happens. So this is what the initial plantings looked like in 5 months after planting. So we expanded on and made more socks of drip tubes. This is about 1.2 years, so about this was taken last month. So the Chenopodium shrubs have really grown and have established on this area, and then we didn't have any Bermuda grass problems. So based on observations on this site, Emoloa is not persistent and may need to be replanted probably like every 2 years. You can treat it as an annual. Bermuda grass is very difficult to control again. And then Aveo, it's a young planting, so it's still doing well. I've planted it on areas where we didn't have irrigation and found that it's really drought tolerant. And aside from that, we also had some pest issues with Aveo. So drought tolerant. This is a series of pictures that I've taken. So this area over here is probably like 7 feet away from any drip source. So I just planted it just as an experiment, just to see if it really can establish just under rain-fed conditions. So at the time of planting, the soil was moist. So this was in December of 2014, so we have little plants over here. About 5 months after planting, May of 2015, the plants are growing happy under rain-fed conditions. During this summer, you can see that they've undergone some drought stress because some of the leaves have dried up, but it's still alive. And then now that we have these frequent rains, it has grown even bigger. So that really is a tough plant. Then we had some pest issues as well, but the interesting thing with the pest issues is that certain plants didn't have any pest issues. Some were more susceptible than others, and this can be a useful information, especially if you want to select more pest-resistant native plants. And then finally, let's look at the Pili slope area. So this area was initially planted with Pili in 2009. So what we did is we had our drip lines, and then at that time we didn't have any pure Pili grass seed, so we had to get Pili grass bales, seed bales. And then what we did is we got bales and then we spread it out in the drip line, and then covered it with hydromulch. This is about 4 months after planting. So you can see here that the Pili grass has grown. About 4 months as well, we did our first mowing. So the mowing is recommended for Pili grass, so that the grass doesn't like flop over and it makes it more stiff. This is about 1.2 years after planting, with more or less 1 or 2 times mowing every year. Then we had that winding down of the grant, so reclaimed by more weedy grass species. We also have some lucina and several other weedy tree species, but the Pili grass is still there. Yeah, so July of 2013, we did a reset. We mowed everything, and then we mowed the Pili grass as well. That was at this point the irrigation was turned off, so we reconnected all the irrigation lines. Then we revived the Pili grass. So this is about 4 years after irrigation. So they're growing nicely with irrigation back. And then about 4 years and 3 months, we started outplanting broadleaves, native broadleaves in between the plantings. So we have, it's very difficult to see here, we have a hina or Achiranthus plantans planted inside the Pili patch. Then the cuttings from the Pili actually serve as mulch. So this is about 4 years and 9 months after planting. You can see the shrubs are growing, and then the Pili grass is spreading. And this is about 5 years and 3 months. So the shrubs are growing nicely. This was about around December. The Pili grass has a really nice golden orange color when it's kind of drying up. And then it's a nice contrast with the native shrubs that are still green, like silvery green. This is about 6 years, approximately 6 years from planting. You can still have the shrubs. We planted shrubs on top, like aali'i, then ilima as well. This was taken in August, and then this was taken just a couple of days ago. With all the rains, you can see that Pili grass that's really nice and tall. We did during this period of rejuvenation, we did some weeding once in a while, probably once every 3 months. The weeds that we found in Pili is usually the guinea grass and koa hawit. So we were able to control that with post-emergent herbicides or selective weeding. So based on observations on this site, Pili is actually the most persistent among all the native plants that we evaluated. It needs rejuvenation, so it's advisable to mow it 1 or 2 times a year. And also to control any growing weeds in between the rows, you need to spot spray to control the weeds. We have planted ilima over here and Achiranthus or ahina. They're doing okay. We have occasional pests once in a while, but it's definitely less than the monocultures. if it's like a pure stand of Ilima or a pure stand of Ahina, then you'll have more pest issues with a pure stand. Maybe because the Pili is hiding these shrubs, or maybe some of the insects are living, some of the predatory insects are living in the Pili grass. So another observation is the plant performance over the years. I've seen a diversity of plant forms with the shrubs in particular. So this is Buhalua, so you have a more compact plant over here, and then you have a more like kind of a stocky one with, and then some are more upright, and some are more, there's some that are more prostrate growing. And these three plants over here are Ilima. And interestingly, you have Ilima that really grows tall and doesn't produce flowers, and then some that are short and produces a lot of flowers. And this is actually the seedling population that we collected from the wild. So with this diversity of forms, there's actually possibilities to select desirable characteristics for natives, so we can select more floriferous ones depending on what you want. Also for Chenopodium, there's more of a shrubby type, and then there's more that's really prostrate, that's really creeping on the ground. So that can be selected for as well for landscape if you want more uniformity. So with diversity of plant forms also comes a diversity in terms of resistant and susceptible individuals. So within our population of plants, we observe resistant and susceptible ones. For example, this picture over here shows you two Ilima plants side by side. One is severely infested with mealybugs, and then the other one is infested with mealybugs, but they're doing well. Looking at it closely, this is the resistant one. You have some mealybugs here, but it's not as worse looking as the other one, which is kind of whitish already because of a lot of mealybugs taking over. So this diversity can be used also for selecting pest resistance if you want a more resilient or more resistant native plant for your landscape. So in summary, I'd like you to take home just 3 points. So the first point is that site preparation is absolutely necessary. Weed control is a critical component of site preparation, so you have to really control your weeds before planting, because if you don't control it, then you will have problems later on. In terms of weed control, if you want to control weeds or minimize weeds, you want to minimize soil disturbance. So you really don't need to till the soil unless your site has been like run over by trucks. But if your site has been like fallowed for like decades or so, there's no significant foot traffic or vehicular traffic, then just planting by OOR, it works for these native plants. Native plantings, the myth is that they're maintenance free. They actually require maintenance. You can't just walk away, like plant and walk away. As you've seen in the picture, we walked away and then the plantings, slowly being, except for Pili grass probably, but when you can see in terms of maintenance, it's very minimal if you want to maintain Pili grass. And then maintenance of pests. Maintenance of your planting as well as your pest issue depends on your species, and also depends on your at the individual level, because I've shown you that there's some resistant plants and there's some more susceptible plants to insect pests. Then finally, planting success rides on the right planting conditions. So it should be the right plant on the right space. We found that Pili grass is the most persistent plant among all the species that we've studied so far at the H1. Emoloa seems to have a 1 to 2 year persistence. And then Mauakiaki may persist for greater than 4 years if it's irrigated and managed well. We found drought-tolerant species. The Echinopodium I've shown you before, wherein we planted it in areas where there's minimal to no irrigation. Also, I didn't mention this before, but we have Ali on site as well. So this was planted in 2010. So this is about 5 years old. This was planted, I think, at the time wherein the first grant was winding down and the irrigation was slowly weaned off. So it passed through that period wherein there's no irrigation and no maintenance. And after reviving the site, we still see that it's alive. So it's a very drought-tolerant species.
So you can grow in lava fields, they'll grow there.
Yes. And then Ilima as well. So with that, I'd like to thank our funding agencies, the USDA and NRCS, for supporting our research. They provided the planting materials for our site. HDOT for providing us the 3 grants that we have been using for the past 8 years. And then I'd like to thank Christakis, who's been instrumental in initiating native plant research here in Hawaii. People from the Waimanalo and Magoon research stations, where I did my work in my master's and my PhD. USDA and NRCS, again, for plant materials. Melinda Muwata, who was an alumna of our weed science lab, who helped out a lot in our establishment. And then a number of student help and interns that we've had through the years with maintaining and planting at the site. So with that, thank you, and if you have any questions, you can email me, visit my website, go to my YouTube channel. This will be posted on my YouTube channel eventually, probably next week. So if you missed anything, then you can access it online. Thank you.